Hi, Peter. This is Tim Lampley, your instructor for Paraclete Academy's Understanding Mathematics Part 1, Grade Level 10, Sophomore in High School. This is Week 3, Day 1 of your first quarter. So I just want to go over a couple of things with you real quick in regards to this particular week's lesson. So first thing, you should always, when you log in, and you should start at the home page, but if you don't, you want to make sure that you're there, and you want to check any announcements. When you click home, you'll have your 3 most recent announcements. If you want to look at all of them, you would just click on announcements, and you can look at some to refresh your memory. There might be some other information you might want to refer to later. Okay, but past that, you're always going to want to look at your modules. Okay, and we see that we are currently at Lesson 4. So we're at Lesson 4, dealing with Roman numerals. Our lessons always start with a review of the previous lesson, then we have our lecture, then we have our class practice. So after we get to the class practice and complete that, and that's going to be by way of video lecture that I'm about to start here with you. We're just kind of doing a quick introduction. After that, you're always going to want to go to assignments. And you're always going to want to look at upcoming assignments. So you'll see that these are divided into past assignments and upcoming. So these are the ones that you're interested in for this lesson. I took the entire assignment, written exercises and review exercises. Instead of giving them to you in one big horse pill to swallow, I decided to divide them into 4 even chunks, or as even as possible chunks. So you'll always check your upcoming assignments. You'll see when it's available for you to start working on. You always want to see when it's due. Okay? And you're going to want to make sure, like for an example, this one is not available until the 13th, and it will be due August 14th at midnight. Obviously, I don't want you up that late, but I'm just giving you the date range of when that's available. After that, those assignments are going to go into the past assignments and will no longer be available to you, except with an extreme exception, okay? So you're always going to want to go, just quick review, home. Then you're going to want to go check your announcements, if any. If you don't see any announcements, then what you're going to want to do is refer to the weekly lesson plan that Mom puts out for you. I do have notes there as far as what's to be done in a particular subject on a particular day. But you always want to check your announcements, then modules to see what we're working on, and then assignments. Okay? And if you check for assignments, you can look for the when it becomes available, when it'll become available, or if it is available, how long it's available till, and when it's due. Okay, so let's go ahead to modules and let's get started on our lesson here. Okay, so each lesson always starts with a review of the previous lesson. So let's go ahead and get that started. Each lesson has what are called learning outcomes. So the reason why you're learning material and what it is you're supposed to get out of that material after learning and studying it. So there's one learning outcome as far as Lesson 3 is concerned, which was rounding numbers, and the outcome is the ability to be able to round numbers up to the nearest 10 million, which you are able to do. Okay, so just a quick recap about the Lesson 3 review is that sometimes an exact number is not needed, and when it's not needed, rounding of a number is used to provide an approximate number to represent a precise one. So for an example, your mom is very good at rounding time. So she might say, pardon me, that, oh, it's 4 o'clock. I need to think about what I'm going to do for dinner and preparing that for us. Now, you look at your clock on your phone, you go, well, wait a second, it's only 3:30. Why is she saying that it's 4 when in reality it's 3:30? Because for the purposes of what she needs to do, she doesn't need an exact number, and she's using an approximate number because she's rounding the time, which would be 3:30, to the nearest hour, which would be 4. And she is using that to express her sense of urgency about preparing and planning for dinner. So that is a perfect example of not needing a precise number to get her point across of what she needs to do, but using an approximate number as that exact number for her purposes, okay? And that's what rounding does, okay? So also at the end of every review is the steps and process of how to perform the operations in that number. This is great for you, Peter, because if you're ever in a situation where you can't quite remember and you're not, you're not exactly sure where your notes are at, and you're not exactly sure how to perform the operation, you can always go back to the lesson reviews and get the snapshot of the steps, which are these right here. So here are the steps in the process of how to round a number to a given place value. So step 1 is to select or find the given place value that you're going to be rounding to. Okay, that is usually provided for you in the directions. So make sure that you read the directions carefully in order to determine what the given place value is that they want you to round to. Okay, and if that information isn't readily accessible or you're not quite sure you understand, ask. Okay, step 2, once we find the given place value, we look at the digit to the right of the given place value, otherwise known as the GPV, and determine if that digit is less than, equal to, or greater than 5. So in other words, we need to know if that digit to the right of the GPV, we need to know its order relationship to the number 5. Now, if that number happens to be less than 5, then we know that the GPV remains the same. If the digit is greater than or equal to 5, then we know that we increase the GPV by 1. All digits that are before or to the left of the GPV, we know that we write those down. Okay, and then we apply whatever rule we need to the GPV, whether it stays the same or increases by 1. And any remaining digits after or to the right of the GPV become zeros. And then the final step, always, is check your work. Okay, that's the review for lesson 3. Let's go ahead and let's move forward to our actual lesson for Roman numerals. Now, Peter, you're going to find that these Roman numerals are actually quite interesting. They're interesting because the Romans used letters to express numbers. This is going to work perfectly with the Latin class that you're taking. So now, not only are you going to be able to read and understand Latin as far as the words are concerned and pronunciation, but you're going to actually be able to count in Roman numerals, which was the numbering system for Latin. Very, very interesting, and I'm glad that it ties together. So the first thing that we need to do, and that we need to look at, is you're going to want to become really acquainted with this chart here. Maybe even copying it or writing it down would be a very good thing to do. So Roman numerals use letters to express numbers. Now, there are some differences between the Roman numeral system and the Arabic number system that we have. So for an example, with the Arabic number system, it's a place value system. A digit is determined by its place within the number. Every digit has a place, and every place has a value. Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, and so on. Right? Well, that's not the case with the Roman numeral system. It's not a place value system. Its letter always represents the same value. Okay? For an example, a V is always 5 ones or 5. Always. And it doesn't matter when or where it's used in a number. It always is 5. Okay? So let's go ahead and let's start going over the rules for the Roman numeral system. Okay? This is going to take a little bit of time. So make sure that you make yourself available to review the lesson in the book. Make sure that you take time to make yourself available to review this video lecture. There's a reason why I'm taking this lesson and stretching it out for the week, because it can take some time to learn. There's reasons why it's important for you to. We still even use the Roman numeral system in various ways, particularly in movies and works of art and different things like that to determine the year and certain dates. And once again, it works really in line with your learning of Latin, which I'm super proud about you in doing, and just anticipate that being a huge value to you. But anyway, I'm digressing. Let's go ahead and let's start talking about the rule system, the system of rules, and how to use Roman numerals. Okay, so I'm still using the lesson as provided in the book, and that's on page 20 of your textbook. If you want to have that available and open to you, you should, even during this lecture, page 20. That is in Chapter 1, Lesson 4, Roman numerals. So the first rule to remember is that when a numeral is repeated, okay, you add them. Okay, you add them. So for an example, okay, and I hope that you can read that. If not, let me see if I can get something larger here for you. So for an example, let's just go ahead and write down the basics actually, okay? So before we even do that, so the basics is that a I is equal to 1. A V is equal to 5. The letter X is equal to 10. The letter L is equal to 50. The letter C is equal to 100. The letter D is equal to 500. And the letter M is equal to 1,000. Okay? So we'll just remember that the letter I is equal to 1, the letter V is equal to 5, the letter X is equal to 10, the letter L is equal to 50, the letter C is equal to 100, the letter D is equal to 500, and the letter M is equal to 1,000. So we still need to know the rules of, when a smaller one is placed next to a larger one. What if the smaller one comes first? What if the larger one comes first? How do we add? How do we subtract? How do we come to totals and all those different things? Those rules we're about to go over right now. Okay, so with this to kind of guide us and help us, the first rule is that when a numeral, we have to say numeral because they're letters that represent numbers. So when a numeral is repeated, add them. Okay, so as an example here is if I have 3 i's, and I know that each I is equal to 1, that's the same thing as going 1 plus 1 plus 1, which equals 3. So I know that 3 i's is equal to 3. Another example would be if I have 3 x's. Okay, so we know that an x is equal to 10. So when 3 numerals are repeated, we know that we add them. So that's the same thing as saying 10 plus 10 plus 10. 10 plus 10 plus 10 we know to be 30. So 3x's is equal to 30. Another example would be if two c's are repeated. Okay, we know that c's are equal to 100, so 2 c's is the same thing as saying 100 plus 100. And we know that that's equal to 200. Okay, another example would be 2m's. So the rule says when a numeral is repeated, we add them. So that's the same thing. We know that m is equal to 1,000. So that's the same thing as saying 1,000 plus, have any idea? That's right, 1,000. So 1,000 plus 1,000, let me just, sorry, just go back here, get a little OCD. 1,000 plus 1,000 is equal to 2,000. Okay, so as a quick recap, rule number 1 says when a numeral is repeated, we add them. Okay, so let's continue and find out what rule number 2 states. Okay, so continuing with rule number 2, we see that when a smaller numeral comes after a larger numeral, or a larger one, we add them. So let's give you an example. Okay, so I have a V and I have an I. So we know that the I is equal to 1 and the V is equal to 5. So here we see in the order, reading left to right, the smaller one comes after the larger one. Does that make sense, Peter? So when that happens, that's the same thing as saying 5 plus 1. When we have a smaller numeral that comes after a larger one, we add them. So that's 5 plus 1. That equals 6. Okay, let's do another example. So another example would say, let's take L triple X. So even when you repeat numbers, so we already know that when numerals are repeated, we add them. But we also know that when a smaller numeral comes after a larger numeral, we add them. All of them, right? So L, we know to be equal to 50. And we know that X is equal to 10, but there's 3 of them, right? So that's the same thing as saying 10 plus 10 plus 10. So 50 and 30, 5 plus 3 is 8. And then we powers of 10, we just add the zeros. So 5, 6, 7, 8, and we add the 0. So L triple X, L XXX equals 80. Okay, let's do rule number 3. Okay, so rule number 2 says that when a smaller numeral comes after, and that's the key point, after a larger one, we add them. Okay, so let's do rule number 3. So when a smaller numeral when a smaller numeral comes before a larger one, we subtract the smaller from the larger. Okay, so rule number 3. When a smaller numeral comes before a larger one, we subtract the smaller from the larger. So let's provide some examples here so we can see what that looks like and make sense out of it. So we have an XL. Now we know that XL means extra large as far as clothing sizes are concerned, but here it means something different. So here we see that instead of the smaller one being last, right? So here we see the smaller one, actually I said that wrong, don't disregard that. Here we see that the smaller one comes before the larger one. Up here the smaller one comes after, and when that happens, when the smaller comes after the larger one, we add them. When the smaller is before the larger one here, we subtract the smaller one from the larger one. So from here, we know that the L is equal to 50, and then the X is equal to 10. So that's the same thing as saying 50 minus 10, and we know that that is 40. Okay, so let's do another example. Let's do CD. So here we see that we have D, which equals, I'm sorry, let me just pull this back here. D equals 500. Okay, and that's, so the smaller one comes before the larger one, so we know we subtract the smaller from the larger. So that's the same thing as saying 500 minus 100, and that equals 400. So this is 400, and this is 40. Okay, now there is a caveat that you need to know about. So let's go ahead and let's discuss the caveat. Caveat is a Latin word that means warning. Okay, so this is a warning or to pay attention to. So we never, and I'm hoping that that's showing up. If it doesn't, I'll just go ahead and write that here with the big marker. So never, okay, okay, that's got to be better. Never subtract V, L, D, or M. And then never use more than one smaller numeral before a larger. So what that means is that you're never going to have a Roman numeral where the V, the L, the D, or the M is the smaller one of the Roman numerals. Okay, so for an example, a V is equal to 5, right? So you're never going to have, to give you an example, you're never going to have a VX. Okay? You're never going to have an LC. You're never going to have a DM. because you would have to subtract this from this. You'd have to subtract this from this. You'd have to subtract this from this. And we never subtract V's, we never subtract L's, we never subtract D's. And then you would never subtract an M. Okay. So, because I believe that's the largest numeral, there isn't anything greater as far as the letters are concerned to represent anything greater than this. So you would never subtract an M, you would never subtract a D, you would never subtract an L, you'd never subtract a V. I hope that that's clear. Now for this caveat, the thing to remember is you never use more than one smaller numeral before a larger one. So where we do have acceptable numbers here, you would never have an XXL. Because remember, if the lesser one is before the larger one, you subtract. But you never use more than one smaller numeral before a larger. So you would never have this. You would never have this. Okay. You would never have this. Okay. So the first caveat, just to review, never subtract V, never subtract L, never subtract D, or never subtract M. These you would never have. Okay. And then the second caveat is never use more than one smaller numeral before a larger. So here you would never have this. So you would have that, but you never use more than one smaller numeral in front of a larger one. So you would never have this. You would never have this. You would never have that. I hope that that's clear. So let's go ahead and let's go to the next rule. We have quite a few more to cover. Okay, so let's go ahead. So rule number 4 says that a smaller numeral may precede or come before, precede only the next larger and second larger numerals. Okay. A smaller numeral may precede only the next larger and second larger numerals. So let me explain what that means. So the order of the numerals are as follows. You have the I, which is the 1, V, which is 5, X, which is 10, L, which is 50, C, which is 100, D is 500, and M, which is 1,000. So a smaller numeral may only precede the next larger. So the next largest numeral after this one, if we go in order, is this one, right? So you could only have, you could have this, and you can have this. So this is the next larger and the second larger. So these are correct. You could not have this. That would be incorrect. That would be incorrect. That would be incorrect. And that would be incorrect. So a smaller numeral can only be preceded by the next larger and the second larger. So if you were going to have a 5, okay, if you were going to have a 5, you could have well, perhaps it might be better just to show you this way. So you could do 1 through 4 and then 9. So see how that works? This is the next from this one, Peter. This is the next largest in line. And then this is the second largest in line. So you can have that, but you couldn't have that. Or you couldn't have that, or you couldn't have that, just like I showed you right here. Okay, so for an x, or for a 10, you could have x through xl and xc. Okay, so that fits, because like from an x, you could have xl, because that's the next largest from this one, or the C, which is the second largest, so this is it, 1, 2, the second largest from this one. That's good, but you could never have an XD, because that's the third from this, or you could never have an XM. These would be incorrect. Okay, and then with a C, you could have C through CD, right? Because that is the first largest and then the second largest. And you could have CM. That would work. So these work, these don't. Those don't. Okay? I hope that makes sense. So let's go ahead and let's go to the next rule. The next rule is rule number 5. And rule number 5 says that placing a line over a number increases its value. A 1,000 times. So let's take a look at that so we can see what we're talking about. So we know, as an example, that V is equal to 5. However, when we take a V and we place a line above it, this now becomes 5 times 1,000. And using the powers of 10, remember that shortcut that any number multiplied by 1 is the number, right? So here we have 5 times 1,000. 5 times 1 is 5. And then with the powers of 10, we just add the zeros, and there's 3 zeros. That becomes 5,000. So here we see that 5 with a line becomes 5,000. We'll see that 10 with a line now becomes 10,000. Okay. And then we see that, and remember, when a numeral precedes a larger, when a smaller one comes before a larger one, When a smaller one comes before a larger one, we subtract the smaller from the larger. So this is 100 minus 10. That equals 90. So 90 with a line over it now become, oh, get that here where you can see. So when a smaller numeral precedes a larger one, you subtract the smaller from the larger. So here we see 100 minus 10 is 90. But when we put a line over the 90, it now becomes 90,000. Okay? So let's continue because we're almost done, Peter. Almost on there. Hang in there. We're almost done, okay? So rule number 6. Okay? It is not proper. Okay? It is not proper or necessary to use the same numeral more than 3 times. So instead of doing this, so for an example, in order to write the number 4, we don't do 4 i's. In order to write the number 20, we don't do 5, 10, 15, 20. Okay. In order to do the number 40, we don't do x, 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 x. This is not proper in Roman numerals, and it's not necessary. Instead, we go to rule 3 to write the next number. Okay? And what we do with that is we put a smaller number before a larger one. So instead of writing 4 like this, which would be improper and not necessary, what we would do is we would take, instead of writing 4 like this, we would take 5 minus 1. Roman numeral, a smaller one precedes the larger one, we subtract. So instead of writing 1, 2, 3, 4, we write 5 minus 1. That's using rule 3, by the way. And that's 4. Instead of writing 20 like this is not how we would write 20. The way that we would write 20 is we would use 2 x's. That equals 20. Okay. Instead of writing 40 like this, we wouldn't write 40 like this. We would write, how we would do that is we would write 50 minus 10, which equals 40. Does that make sense? So we don't, it's not proper and it's not necessary to use a Roman numeral and repeat it more than 3 times. So we don't do this, we don't do this, we don't do this. Instead of this, we do this. 5 minus 4. For 20, we just use, because we already have, you can repeat a numeral up to 3 times, right? So here, you would just write the 2 10s, that's the same thing as 20, and it's proper. This is not proper. But what you would do is you would use 50 minus 10, and that's the same thing as 40, and it's proper. Okay? So those are the rules to Roman numerals. Those are the rules to Roman numerals. So just as a quick recap, when a numeral is repeated, and it can only be repeated up to 3 times max, add them. Okay? When a smaller numeral comes after a larger one, we add them. When a smaller numeral comes before a larger one, we subtract the smaller from the larger. We also remember that we never subtract V, L, D, or M. Also remember, we never use more than one smaller numeral before a larger one. Here's the examples of, sorry, Peter. Sorry about that. Okay. So we never use more than one smaller numeral before a larger one. So we never do this. That's a no-no. Okay. Rule number 4, a smaller numeral may precede only the next larger or second larger numerals. Okay. So this is permissible and this is permissible because with an I, this is the next largest or the second largest. Okay. But we don't do IL, we don't do IC, we don't do ID, we don't do IM. That's too far apart. For the X's, so for X, we could do X, XL, and we could do XC, but we never do that because that's the next largest or the second largest from here. But we never do XD, we never do XM. Okay, for C's, it's the same thing. So for C, we can do CD because that's the next largest, or CM, which is the next largest, but we don't do anything else other than that. Also remember Rule 5, placing a line over a number increases its value 1,000 times. So a V is 5, but with a line over the V, it becomes 5,000. An X is 10, but with a line over it, it becomes 10,000. XC, for an example, is 90. But with a line over it, it becomes 90,000. And then the last rule is that it's not proper, it's neither proper nor necessary to use the same numeral more than 3 times. Instead, use Rule 3 to rewrite the number. Okay? So that's the video lecture. Now let's go ahead and let's move to class practice.